For this video, I want to offer a shrimp tank versus shrimp jar comparison to try and help people find the best setup for their needs. Both options can be great for beginners who are looking to keep cherry shrimp or other types of Neocaridina, but they can also work with certain types of Caridina shrimp too. I currently have 5 dedicated shrimp tanks and 2 shrimp jars, but this shrimp tank and this shrimp jar are new and still cycling, so there's not actually any shrimp in there yet. So starting off with the costs for each setup, because this will probably be the most important factor for a lot of people. If you're in the USA, then you can get a 5.5 gallon tank for $24.99 or a 10 US gallon tank for $29.99, with prices being halved during the PetCo half off Aqueon sale. Here in Europe, the Diversa or Aquatown ranges will probably be the cheapest options, and a 25 litre tank that is around 6.6 US gallons will usually be around £30. Jar prices seem to fluctuate a lot, and I've seen some decent sized jars starting at around $10 going all the way up to $30. Personally, I use these 6.5 litre Biscotti jars that are around 1.7 US gallons, and their price usually starts at around £13, but I have seen them at £20. You can clean and repurpose old pickle jars if you can find them in your area, but it's an absolute pain to get decent sized pickle jars here where I live, so I usually just buy jars on Amazon. When it comes to lighting, I use a cheap Sierra light on my shrimp tanks, and it retails at around $19 or £16.50, but so far it's working very well. I use the Hygge HG033 USB light for both of my shrimp jars, and it costs around $19 or £16, and it's probably one of the best lights on the market right now for smaller containers. It does have a higher light output than a lot of the other options on the market right now, and it comes with a built-in timer function to automate the lights turning off and on as required. Using natural filtration with something like the Wallstad method works well for both shrimp tanks and shrimp jars, and I do like to use it in a lot of my setups. This method uses plants for natural water purification, and I use it in all of my current shrimp jars and 2 of my shrimp tanks. I have dedicated videos going over the setups of this Wallstad cherry shrimp tank and this Wallstad shrimp jar that I link to in the description if you're curious about it. My orange Neocaridina and yellow Neocaridina tanks both use cheap sponge filters that are around $5 each, that are both powered by cheap USB air pumps that are around $10 each. A healthy Neocaridina colony should be able to survive at room temperature in most houses with central heat and year round regardless of season, so I don't use heaters in my shrimp setups, reducing costs further. Shrimp tanks will usually cost more than a shrimp jar, but the price increase really isn't that much, and you get so much more space for your money with a shrimp tank that I'm going to give the tanks the win for this section of the video. So moving on to the various types of shrimp that you can keep in these shrimp jars, and in my opinion, Neocaridina are the perfect option. Neocaridina shrimp come in a wide range of colours including red, yellow, orange, white, black, green, blue and various rilly patterns. All of my shrimp setups currently contain some type of Neocaridina shrimp, and I highly recommend them if you are new to the hobby. I have also kept Armano shrimps in dedicated shrimp tanks and shrimp jars without issue, but their bland appearance often puts people off keeping them, but they are great little algae eaters for these setups. I have no direct experience with ghost shrimp, but I do know other people who keep dedicated ghost shrimp tanks and ghost shrimp jars, so these can be a valid option too. Personally, I would avoid any other type of shrimp for a shrimp jar setup, but most types of shrimp can be kept in a tank with the right setup. So moving on to colony size and the specific species of shrimp that you keep, your tank setup and your feeding schedule will all come into play for this one. Some people like to grow huge shrimp colonies and don't really worry about colour quality, while other people like to maintain a far smaller colony that is higher grade with the best possible colours. Thankfully, shrimp have a very low bioload, letting you keep large colonies in tanks that would usually only be able to hold a handful of fish. In theory, there's two main limitations to the size of your shrimp colony in whichever setup you choose, and they are the food supply and maintaining safe and stable water parameters. I currently have around 80 cherry shrimp in this 25 litre or 6.6 US gallon tank, and they just keep breeding constantly, but the water parameters in here is still fine. I would guess that there's currently around 20 yellow neocaridina in this shrimp jar, but most of them are still babies, and I usually aim for between 5 and 10 adults in my jars at any given time. Most people in the hobby do want to have a decent sized shrimp colony, so I'm going to give shrimp tanks the win for this section. Moving on to water stability, and it's usually easier to maintain safe and stable water parameters in a shrimp tank when compared to a shrimp jar because the extra space lets you add a filter to the tank. Now, I don't actually have any tanks set up with this method right now, but a cheap sponge filter that's backed up with fast grown stem plants such as Limnophilia sessiliflora, pearlweed or Rotala rotundifolia that also uses floating plants like salvinia, red root floaters or water lettuce form the core of the dream team for water purification. If you are new to the shrimp keeping hobby, I would highly recommend you use some sort of combination like that so the live plants, bacteria and archaea all work together to keep your shrimp safe. The smaller size of a shrimp jar usually causes people to rely on fast grown stem plants and floating plants, but as you can see in this shrimp jar, my yellow neocaridina are breeding like crazy, so it's not like there's any problems in there. Another thing to keep in mind is that larger water volumes are usually easier to keep stable as the amount of ammonia released from a single granule of food is the same regardless of the water volume. This means that the larger water volume in a shrimp tank will often dilute any ammonia, preventing any spikes that may be harmful to your shrimp. I'm going to give shrimp tanks the win on this one, but in my experience, shrimp jars really aren't as difficult to maintain as some people on social media make out, and just add enough stem plants and floating plants and you should be good. Moving on to breeding, and the specific type of shrimp that you keep will play a large role for this one. If you are new and want to breed your shrimp, then I highly recommend neocaridina shrimp. Cherry shrimp are very easy to breed and you can breed them in both shrimp tanks and shrimp jars without issue. They also tend to breed true, meaning that most cherry shrimp babies will also be red, reducing the amount of line maintenance required on your colony. My yellow neocaridina have also been very easy to breed, but some of their babies tend to have the more washed out yellow look to them rather than the dark yellow their parents had, so there is some maintenance required for these. Other neocaridina lines such as green jade shrimp may not breed true, requiring you to remove any non-green babies from the setup, increasing the amount of line maintenance required. If you are brand new to the hobby, just go with red cherry shrimp because they are cheap, easy to find, they usually breed true and they contrast very well with the colour of green plants, making them stand out and easy to see. I am going to give the win to a shrimp tank for the breeding section just because it makes it so much easier to keep a decent sized colony in there without issue. Moving on to feeding, and the specific feeding strategy that you choose will come into play with this one. Personally, I feed my larger shrimp colonies every day and my smaller colonies are fed 3 times per week. Some people feed their shrimp once per week, others feed them once per month, and some people leave their shrimp to survive on algae, biofilm and detritus in their tank, replicating their natural diets. My cherry shrimp and yellow neocaridina have both been far easier to breed when feeding them a high protein food such as fluval bug bites, Hikari mini algae wafers or bloodworm. In addition to the higher breeding rates, I also like to sit and watch my shrimp devour the various foods that I add to their tanks, so I do feed my colonies more frequently than a lot of other people. Thankfully, the live plants in my setups counter the high food load that I add, preventing any water parameter fluctuation, helping to keep my shrimp safe. In my opinion, you can easily add enough live plants to counter daily feeding in both shrimp tanks and shrimp jars, so I'm going to call this one a draw. Next up we have space requirements, and this gives shrimp jars their only real advantage over shrimp tanks in my opinion. Most people can easily find somewhere in their home for a shrimp jar, but depending on your available space, it could be a challenge to find the room to keep a shrimp tank. Even a small 5-gallon tank can take up a lot of space in a small apartment, a university room or a military barrack block, potentially ruling it out as an option. One thing to keep in mind is that shrimp don't require swim space like many species of fish, they require grazing space. This means that shrimp can do very well in rectangle, cube or even orb-shaped tanks, as you can add plants, rocks and driftwood and various other decorations to increase the available grazing space. Just because you can't find the space for a rectangle shrimp tank doesn't mean you can't find the space for a cube or orb, so try and explore all options. If you do have limited space, then a shrimp jar is the obvious winner here, but I would always recommend a shrimp tank if possible. Finally, we have maintenance, and this can be as passive or as involved as you like. I let my first shrimp jar grow out and get that wild, unkept jungle look without ever doing any maintenance on it, but it didn't look very appealing. In most cases, the more you care about the aesthetics of your setup, the more maintenance will be required. A shrimp tank does offer more space for plants to grow before they need trimming, while also offering more room to maneuver when doing your maintenance, keeping things as easy as possible. It can be a pain to trim plants in my shrimp jar, and this is pretty big as far as jars go, so it will be a nightmare to do maintenance on some smaller setups. Algae can also build up on your tank glass too, but small magnetic algae scrapers make this easy to deal with in both shrimp tanks and shrimp jars. Still, I am going to give the win to shrimp tanks for this section because it's been so much easier for me to do the required trimming and maintenance in my shrimp tanks compared to my shrimp jars. So just to offer a quick conclusion, and I honestly think a shrimp tank will be the best option for most people. They do cost a little bit more, but the additional space that they provide just makes things so much easier. The only real advantage of a shrimp jar is the small size, so if you do have limited space it may be the best option for you, but most people will be better off with a shrimp tank if you are new to the hobby. If you are new to the hobby, I'd recommend you get a shrimp tank that's a minimum of 5 US gallons, then you add some fast growing stem plants, some floating plants and get yourself a cheap sponge filter to cycle the aquarium. Something like Dr. Tim's ammonia solution is perfect for this type of stuff, and the tank will be cycled within 4 to 6 weeks, and then you can add some cherry shrimp. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Thanks for watching and have a good day.